Hi there, Ram owners. Today in your 2017 Ram 2500, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Demco's above bed rail kit. With rail kits, there's really not a whole lot of huge differences between them. They're all going to give you your attachment point to place your fifth wheel in place. They all have a fairly standard spacing size for the attachment, so that way it should work with pretty much any type of fifth wheel that you're planning on installing in here. Your fifth wheel will attach by pinning it in, just like with the other base rails that you've probably been used to before. So you can see there's not a whole lot of big differences between this one and some of the competitors, but there are a few subtle differences that might not stand out right away, but after you start to really look at it and use these, I kind of find that these ones are not quite as nice as the Reese and B&W ones that we offer. Now, one of the things they do really nice though that I do like is the powder coating on them. It's got a nice textured black powder coat on it that would look really good in like a truck bed that has like a liner on the inside. It would blend in really nice. Unlike the B&W, which is kind of a gray, it is a very nice powder coating, but if you don't like that gray smooth look that it has, kind of looks like an old Ford tractor, then if you don't like that color, then maybe those aren't the best for you. But I personally like the Reese and the B&Ws for their style a little better because of how you can use your truck bed when you don't have a fifth wheel in here. Because these will both accept fifth wheels just like the Reese and the Demco, but when you're not using a fifth wheel, these ones here have hex head bolts on top, all the way around. And that's going to make it even more difficult to be able to slide things in and out of your bed. And they also place the bolts in the center of the rail on the ends on these Demco ones, versus the Reese and the B&W actually place their bolts here in the lower portion, and they use carriage bolts, which makes it a much smoother profile across the top. So with something like this, if you load your truck bed up with like sheetrock or some other sensitive materials, you're going to have to lay something down in here like sacrificial plywood or something to prevent these from digging in to your sheetrock. Now with the B&W and the Reese, I would probably still recommend sitting something down in here just because it is going to be a little uneven, but you don't have any bolt head or jagged edges. You just got the smoothness of the rail. So that sacrificial piece that you've got will probably last a whole lot longer. It's a lot easier to slide your things in and out of your truck. With this, that plywood you might be using as kind of a slide to get your stuff out, and it's going to want to catch on the head of these bolts. So the attachment mechanism here with the single bolt on each side there just is not as doesn't seem as good of an option to me as the B&W and the Reese's. And another thing that I dislike about it is that it only has attachments on the sides. And when you look at the Reese and the B&Ws, you get, not only do you get 2 bolts per side. Now they are smaller pieces of hardware. This is a much bigger bolt than what you would get in the Reese or the B&Ws, but you get 2 per side on the Reese and the B&W, and you get 1 in the center at this point and also at this point. So you get a total of 5 fasteners per rail, whereas we're hooking on here right now by just 2 fasteners per rail, even though they are larger fasteners. It just feels that the other options are going to give you a better clamping surface to your truck bed, especially here in the middle. I really like that it has an attachment there to prevent any type of flexing here in the middle. We don't get that here with the Demco, but it does come with a custom fit rail kit that's fairly similar to the competition like the B&W and Reese as far as the way that it installs. This one is actually probably a slightly bit easier to install just because there is less hardware, but I will say that the instructions that come with the Demco here do make it probably more difficult to install these fewer pieces of hardware because it's not outlined very well. So we're going to kind of cover how to install it on here, because you'll see when you get yours and you open it up, you'll see your instructions, and you'll probably be going right to our video because there's just not a whole lot written in there. There's not a lot of visual aids in there either. Reese and especially B&W do a much better job on providing good information in their instructions to help you get it installed. But all in all, it is going to still accomplish the same thing. You're still going to be able to put those on there. I just personally like the other options better because of their low profileness. I don't like the hex bolt at the top. That also makes it more difficult to install because you're going to need a buddy up here holding this hex while you torque the bolts and stuff like that. But they will accomplish it. I think this is probably best for people that are mostly concerned with aesthetics and they like the appearance of this rail. Otherwise, I would probably recommend a Reese or B&W, with B&W being my personal favorite as far as how fit and finish goes on the vehicle. When purchasing rails here at eTrailer, I highly recommend that you use our fit guide to ensure that you get the appropriate installation kit with your base rails, so that way they match right up to your vehicle. And you can also purchase these with a fifth wheel head, so if you want to get the whole package so you're ready to drop it in and head right out the door with your trailer, you can get that whole thing as one kit deal that is going to be designed for your truck. It is very important that you pay attention to the length of your bed when ordering a fifth wheel, because if you have a short bed, then you may need a sliding fifth wheel in order to clear the cab depending on your trailer. We'll begin our installation here in the back of our truck. We're gonna take our rear rail and we're gonna start with this one and get this one marked out. It gives you a measurement in your instructions on where to place this rail in relation to the rear of your truck bed. So that's this area here, not the tailgate. Make sure it's the truck bed. There are a couple of different measurements there based on the length of your truck bed, so make sure you choose the appropriate measurement for your particular truck bed length. Once you've got that measured out to the appropriate point, we can go ahead and mark our holes. For the rear rail, we're going to use the most inside set of these square holes here, so count it 4 in. And then we're going to place a mark at the center of this hole. So we're just going to go straight down with our paint stick here and mark the center of this hole. We'll do the same thing over on the other side. Now we're not only measuring the distance from the truck bed, we're also checking to make sure that it's centered side to side. You can kind of use a visual cue of the center square here, lining it up between this corrugation to kind of get you close, and then just measure from the edge on each side to fine tune it to get the perfect center. So now we're going to go ahead and drill this out. I'm just going to use an 1/8 inch drill bit here to start, just for a pilot hole to make sure that everything looks like we're going to line up properly. I did notice that on each side, the marks that we made are kind of pretty close to the edge of where the corrugation stops here on this inset one too. So it's another visual cue to help you make sure you're roughly in the right location. So now we're going to go ahead and drill it out. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We are going to just double check below to make sure that everything looks good in that area, that there's no components down there that we need to relocate or be careful of when drilling to a larger size. We're now going to enlarge it. We went ahead and checked below and everything looked good, so now we'll enlarge it using a 5/8 drill bit. All right, so now that we've got this drilled out, we're just going to clean up the shavings we made here. And then after we clean up our mess, just to help prevent rust and corrosion, you can either use clear coat, or we've got a little bit of white here that'll match nicely, and we're just going to spray our hole here. That'll just help seal it up. So now you can just put your rail back in place, and then you're going to take the large hex head bolts that come in your kit and drop those down through the holes. And you can see they are kind of tight, so you may even want to consider enlarging the hole. We might actually take a step bit back at this and just enlarge it just a little bit to make our bolts easier to slide in and out. Because we're going to be setting this up with the fifth wheel that we have here on hand. Our customer hasn't decided on his fifth wheel yet. And when you go to change from one fifth wheel to the other, they do have a fairly standard sizing, but they can be ever so slightly different than one another. And that little bit of extra play in this area, just ever so slightly oversizing them, makes a big difference in getting a different fifth wheel installed onto these rails. So here we got a step bit. We're just going to go up to the next size up from where we're at, and then we will hit this with the paint once again just to reseal it. So after we do that, we'll just double check our bolt. Still a little stiff, so we'll go one more. That slides in and out easily enough, and we should be able to finish up what we're doing. So we'll just clean that back up again and put our rails back in place. So now we're just going to recheck them, and our bolts drop down in there nice and easy, so that looks good. So now we're going to grab your fifth wheel and go ahead and set it in place. Again, we're just going to be using a base that we have here around the shop to set this up. But if you have your exact fifth wheel, that's the best one to use, because that way you're setting it up exactly for the fifth wheel that you have. Because due to powder coating and very minor tolerance differences, they are going to be very close, but if you have it set up exactly for yours, it'll go in and out butter smooth. All right, so now we've got our rail that we had just put on was sitting here. I went ahead and sat our fifth wheel base here in place and placed the other rail underneath of it. If you have pins, I recommend sliding those in as well. That'll just help ensure that you're lined up as best as possible. And then after you've got that all set up, next thing you want to do is just double check your front rail, making sure that it's centered, because there is going to be a little bit of play in these components here. So just measure from side to side. Just try to make sure that you get it roughly centered as best you can. And that all looks good side to side there. It's also not a bad idea to check the measurement between the two rails to make sure that's even as well, because there is, again, just a little bit of play. And that all looks good. Once everything's all squared up, we're just gonna mark our hole just like we did the other one and drill it out. Now this is gonna be a different set of holes. Instead of using the inside set here, we're gonna move one over. So count in 1, 2, 3, and those are the holes that we wanna use. We're gonna mark the other side the same way. We can now lift our base and our rail off of here and go ahead and drill that out. I recommend doing it the same way as you did the rear. Start with the small bits so you can verify the location looks good, and then go ahead and step it up to the same size as we did with these bolts. So now we'll just drill out the marks that we made here. It is pretty close to the edge on the side, so this is going to be a little bit difficult of a drill to get started because of the rounded edge right there where it's so close to. Now this should go all the way down into a hat channel. So we're poking our bit down there and we can feel, well, actually we don't feel. So we can't feel the bottom with this bit. So we may need to find a longer bit then. I'm gonna try extending it out because we will eventually need to drill all the way through this hat channel. So let's just see if we extend the bit out some, if we were gonna have a long enough bit here. All right, so we are gonna have to get ourselves a longer bit. We're gonna drill out the other side as well. You can go ahead and enlarge these, but if you keep it a smaller pilot hole, it does make it a little bit easier for you to help try and line up a hole down there in the bottom. Otherwise, if you enlarge it first, just try and eyeball the hole that you need to drill in the hat channel with a longer bit. So now we double checked. I just took a long, just kind of a pick or a screwdriver, anything that you've got big enough, you can poke down in that hole, and you should be able to look in the side of your hat channel to verify that you did line that up properly with the hat channel. So we already verified that there, so we're gonna go ahead and just enlarge this the same way we did that one. We're gonna use our 5/8 bit first, and then we will probably take our step bit and go up one little size there to make sure that everything lines up easily. So we've now switched to a 1/4 inch drill bit. That way it's a little bit longer. It's just long enough to reach the bottom of the hat channel there. And I don't recommend going any larger in drill bit size than this, because oftentimes your hole saws are gonna have a 1/4 inch bit for the pilot bit. And we're gonna have to use a hole saw down below to give us a nice large hole to feed our hardware through. So 1/4 inch will work out very well for you. And we wanna try to center it so that way when we drill below, our hole will be centered. We're now underneath the vehicle. We need to drill out the underside of that hat channel like we talked about. But before we do that, there's a few things down here that's kind of in the way that we're gonna move out of the way to make your life easier. So one, I'd recommend go ahead and drop down your spare tire, get that out of the way. And then we're gonna take out the heat shield here next, because if we're looking underneath our rear rail, you can see here, this is where one of the bolts for the rear rail is dropping down. The other one is behind the heat shield. You might be able to see it there, but it's really hard to get to at this point. So to take this out, we're going to have a couple of fasteners up here, and then you can see we've got 3 right there. We're going to remove all of these with a 10mm socket. Make sure you grab your heat shield before you remove the last bolt, and then you can just pull that down and set it aside. So we're now underneath. We're looking at the hole that we had drilled from the top, the small pilot hole into the bottom of the hat channel, and now we got our 1-inch hole saw in there. We're going to drill straight up through the bottom of the channel to give us our access hole. And we're going to repeat that on the other side as well. It is a little confusing when working with this kit because you receive a universal set of bolts and hardware, and you also receive a custom fit set that comes with the rails with your brackets. So you would think that you're going to use the hardware out of the custom fit, but you actually use a hodgepodge mix between universal hardware and the hardware that comes in the kit. These long hex bolts are actually going to go in the front, and we're going to use the short hex bolts that come in the universal kit here in the back. So now to take up some of the space here between the opening and our bed, so when we tighten these bolts down so it doesn't crush the bed, this doesn't come in the custom kit, but when you purchase this rail kit, it also comes with kind of a universal installation kit, and some of these pieces you can find in that, so you should get these with your rails. And we're going to use one of the spacers and a couple of the washers to take up this space. So we're going to just pull our bolt up. We'll slide these guys in and over, and it gets a little difficult, so you might need a screwdriver or something to help finish sliding them over there. And we're going to do this on both sides, and then once we get it lined up with our hole, we can drop our bolt back down again. So after we slid it in there with the 2 washers, we kind of looked at it and it was actually raising up our rail just a little bit, so we decided to take one out. So we're just using the spacer and a single washer and then putting our bolt down. That'll just help prevent it from collapsing. We'll do the same on the other side. Now if you're working on an older truck like we are, after it's got a few years in it, the holes here in the side of the frame next to where our bolts drop down, that's where our brackets are going to attach. And I would recommend before going to put your brackets on there, checking these holes. I'm going to take the bolt and I'm going to thread it into each one and make sure that I can thread it in there. If I can't, then you might need to follow it up with a tap. The size you're looking for is an M12 by 1.5. So that one's, I can get it to start, but it gets a little stiff. We've sprayed some rust penetrant on it, and then we're just going to run it in and out with a 3/4 socket. Now if yours is extremely rusted, you're not going to be able to just run it in and out with the bolt. You are going to need a tap. The tap is designed with channels in it that allows material to actually get removed versus a regular bolt here. You're just kind of squishing all the material out into the threads. But if it's nice and easy like that, then it's not a big deal. This will ensure that it goes in easily when we go to lift the brackets up. So I'm going to do this for each one of those threaded holes in the side of the frame. So here we are again, back down below, and there you can see our bolt where it passes through. We no longer have so much length there, and we're able to place our flat washer and our flange nut right on there. And we're just going to loosely install the hardware, just kind of to hold it in place. That'll be fine there for now. We're going to repeat this for the other side, and then we'll put our front brackets on. We're now on our front bracket. Again, these are labeled, so there you see passenger front. Before you go to put your bracket up, there's a spacer that you'll want to slide up into that hole that we had drilled out. And if you didn't get it drilled perfect, we got ours a little bit off. We were still able to slide it up in there, but it was a little bit tight. Kind of had to tap it up in there with a hammer a little bit. And then what you can do, if it is real tight when you're tapping it up, if you get it to go past the threads, you can actually put your nut on here and just tighten down the nut some, and that'll draw the spacer up in there for you. Once you get the spacer up in there though, we can set our bracket into place here. We'll go ahead and place a flat washer and a flange nut on the bolt, and then we're going to use the same combination of hardware as we did with the rear bracket, the smaller metric bolt, lock washer, and flat washer. to go into the side of the frame. Now for your attachments here on the side of the frame, you'll notice that when you go to put these in, you have a gap, more than likely on this forwardmost bolt, the one that's near the cross tube here. If you do have a gap like that, you'll want to use one of the large spacers in your kit to take out that gap. Just slide that back out if you do have a gap. Slide your spacer up there, and then thread that back in, and that'll take up the gap that we had. We're going to do the same thing over on the other side. The only real difference is the other side does have some wiring that runs down the frame, so we are going to have to pop that wiring out to put our bracket up. We don't want to pinch any components in between our bracket and the frame. So once we get all of our hardware started, we can go back and start to tighten everything down. We're going to use a 15/16 socket for our large nuts. And we're just snugging them up. They are likely going to spin because they're hex on top, so we're going to need an assistant to help us fully torque those, but I just recommend running it up so that way it draws it up to the bottom of the bed. And after you've drawn it up, then we can go back and do the side bolts to draw it to the side. We're going to switch to a 3/4 socket or a 19mm for these. And you will likely need a swivel to be able to access the inner ones there, the way that they kind of put that in the way. So a shorter socket and a swivel will allow you to get in there for these guys. And then we're just going to repeat that for all the remaining brackets. Once you get all your hardware snugged down, you can go back and torque it all to the specifications outlined in your instructions. So now we're going to torque our bolts. We're up here up top because it's a lot easier to use your torque wrench up top. Typically I would recommend torquing on the nut side, but due to the restrictions of the space down there, it's easier to have your assistant hold the nut while you torque the bolt. So he's down there holding, and we'll just zip it on down here. We're almost there. Almost. There it is. And then we'll just move to the next one, and we'll just repeat that all the way around. Once you got all your hardware torqued down, at that point you're ready to just slide your fifth wheel in the back here, pin it in, and then you're ready to hook up and hit the road. And that completes our installation of Demco's above bed rail kit on our 2017 Ram 2500.